Hey guys, today we're talking about teddy bears! Sort of. This is probably the craziest anti-gun ad spot I have ever seen. This is Teddy Gun from the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. The group is actually arguing that teddy bears are more heavily regulated than guns by creating a teddy bear that's also a gun. I mean, look at this thing. It's terrifying. It's supposedly a 10-inch tall, 6-shot .357 minus a firing mechanism. And supposedly designing it to look like a teddy bear means it's suddenly out in the no man's land of zero regulation. Because that's totally realistic. Their website tries to prove this by featuring a list of almost 24 regulations for the stuffed toys and only one for guns? Yeah. But wait! There's an asterisk there! According to the barely legible fine print, comparison is based on federal safety regulations for the manufacture of domestic toys and firearms. Oh, so they're comparing manufacturing laws. That's funny. You'd almost think they were comparing two things that have nothing to do with each other. Most of the laws listed on the teddy bear side have to do with materials that manufacturers are allowed to use because, let's be real, children put everything in their mouths and it's likely that they're going to drag this teddy bear everywhere they go for the next, how many years. Those same laws don't exist with guns because it's highly unlikely a baby will be toting around a 1911 or even be close enough to suck on one unless their parents are irresponsible crazy people. Therefore, federal codes around technical requirements for determining a sharp point in toys and other articles intended for use by children under 8 years of age are obviously not going to apply to anything other than toys and other articles intended for use by children under 8 years of age. Same for codes around stuffing materials and choking hazards and lead paint. It just doesn't apply here. So the argument that putting a gun on a stuffed animal's head suddenly makes it void of all regulation is actually a lot more ridiculous than it sounds. Their mission statement says that they want, quote, federal common sense gun laws like universal background checks on all gun and ammo sales, legalizing CDC research on gun violence, and Illinois common sense gun laws like state license for gun dealers and the Lethal Gun Violence Order of Protection Act. A few points here. Number 1. 30 House and Senate Democrats just introduced a $60 million funding bill for the CDC to research gun violence. The proposal would set aside $10 million a year for the next 6 years, starting in 2018. So there is no blanket ban on research into gun violence. There is a block on funding for actions intended to restrict or control purchases and gun use. In fact, Obama ordered the CDC to resume gun violence research after the Newtown shooting. And you know what they found? That armed citizens are less likely to be injured by an attacker, that defensive gun use is more common than anti-gunners would like to believe, and mass shootings and accidental deaths are not only a tiny fraction of gun-related deaths, but are going down, and no one has been able to actually prove that gun control works. So I guess let's just sweep that one under the rug. Being a gun dealer already requires a federal firearms license from the ATF. Having an additional state license on top of that would be utterly ridiculous and redundant. The group says it's necessary so that gun dealers can be held personally responsible for any guns or ammo they've ever sold that somehow ends up used in a crime or found on the black market if the buyer decides to sell it to Joe, who sells it to Barry, who then sells it to some drug dealer that uses it in a crime. How exactly is that John Doe gun shop's responsibility? Just because a product they legally sold eventually ends up in illegal hands does not mean they're irresponsible business owners. While we're on that point, to my knowledge, there's no such thing as a federal teddy bear license required to sell teddy bears, so already they have a moot point. Their website does put out an interesting point that, allegedly, 20% of the guns used in Chicago crimes come from 4 particular gun shops, which the site lists by name. Additionally, they claim that 90% of the guns used in crimes throughout the country can again be traced back to some of those same gun stores. Number 1, I have a really hard time believing that statistic, but if it's true, why not go after those shops, or work on figuring out how the country's gang members and armed robbers undercovers are all getting their guns from Chicago? Why punish everyone else with unnecessary paperwork and licensing and fees and business killing regulations? But what's particularly worrisome is this group's support for the Lethal Gun Violence Order of Protection Act. This is the Illinois version of a gun restraining order where anyone would be able to just call up the police or the courts and demand a restraining order and gun confiscation with no burden of proof, and it would be awarded then and there without any sort of investigation. The dangerous person would then have their concealed carry permits and any other gun licenses revoked and all guns confiscated without any warning until the courts just decide that they no longer pose a threat, which would probably be never. I mean, what could go wrong with that? But it gets worse. Turns out their 47-second ad spot isn't just an ad spot, it's a trailer for a movie. This little bundle of horror is being turned into a full documentary about how teddy bears are more regulated than guns. No word yet on a release date, but I'm sure it will be awful and misinformed. That is your Second Amendment and firearm news for the week. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can also find me now on vidme.com. And if you really like my videos and want to help me spread the message of liberty, you can also help me by supporting me on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and until next week, stay safe and happy shooting.